Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you are enjoying this, please. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today, we are doing chapter 12 of Breaking Step. Tibs! Darren's jovial expression turned serious. What happened? Tibs eyed his cut shirt and the blood that soaked the sleeves where his attacker had cut his arm. I'm fine. It had been the first of his would-be assassin's attack, and the only one that reached his flesh. The other cuts on his shirts were sacrifices he had to make in the process of getting close to her to end the attacks. And her. She'd smirked as her life essence had ebbed away, probably thinking the poison on her knife would finish the job. The corruption in it hadn't affected Tibbs, and he'd easily healed the cut with purity. He hadn't killed her with essence, since he didn't know if that left traces a skilled adventurer could use to guide them to the culprit. Tibbs could sense essence, and his sword left traces of water essence in the cuts, which dissipated after a few seconds. But was that because he was not skilled enough to sense what was left, or there was nothing left? He couldn't take the chance. He left her body in the alley where she'd attacked him. With all the thugs and troublemakers acting on Sebastian's post-death revenge, plenty of bodies had been found by the guards. She'd be one of those. Another skirmish for the glory of being Sebastian's hand in the destruction of what Tibbs loved. You are bleeding, the merchant said, stepping around the counter. Why weren't you wearing armor? Why weren't you wearing your armor? It's Craggle Rock, Tibbs replied as Darren took his arm to examine it. I don't need to wear armor in my town. He'd also hadn't wanted Daran to realize it wasn't the armor he had sold Tibbs. Stowe had made it identical, but details were important to merchants and thieves, so Daran was skilled at noticing them. The merchant might not think much of it being different, but he might. As friendly as he was, Daran was a merchant. Quone's merchant was a merchant. Quains drove them, and what would the guild? Okay, I need to restructure that. Merchant, so this can be like that. Quains drove them. As friendly as he was, Darren was a merchant. Quains drove them. What would the guild give to learn runners weren't handing over all enchanted items they found in the dungeon? That the dungeon made some that couldn't be detected as magical. There's no cut, Darren said, turning his arm over. I had a cleric heal it. The merchant eyed him suspiciously. You paid what clerics charge for this? I know a few. Tibbs knew one, but he hadn't seen Clara in Craggle Rock since the end of Sebastian's raid. She'd been recalled, and he didn't know if she'd be allowed back after disobeying the orders not to help the runners. The injury in the alley, with no one watching, had given him the chance to experiment. Instead of applying the weave, if it was even that, he wouldn't know how it compared until Alistair taught him how to make one with water, and letting it do its work, he kept it from moving deeper, then broke it apart partway. It resisted him. Once formed, the weave wanted to continue its work, to heal what needed to be healed, to move into him and find other injuries until it was spent. Use and dissipate sounded more like it was like an etching than a weave. Was that what Tibbs made with purity? Even if Clara liked it to weaving? Something else he wouldn't know until Alistair taught him. Darren eyed the other cuts and the blood on his shirt and pants. It's hers, Tibbs said, and anything not on his sleeve was. He tried using water to clean it out, but the stains left behind by the parts that weren't carried away. As he pulled the water through the cloth looked more out of place than the blood on a runner, especially one known for having been a thorn in Sebastian's side. What did you do with her body? I left it there. Erdian isn't stopping everyone from coming in to destroy my town. Guards find their bodies every few days as they kill each other, so long as it's not one of the town folks or someone who looks to have coins. He isn't going to care. And are they? Darren asked. Killing one another, I mean, or is someone looking out for you? Tibs shrugged. He'd asked Jackal if he'd kill some of them, and his friend had been disappointed to admit he hadn't come across any of them in the middle of destroying something. As had caught one as they were about to burn down a building, but he'd handed them to the guards. None of his rogues had admitted to taking care of them, and few had lied to him about it. Of the other runners, Tib didn't care. Quigley might, but he wouldn't go looking for them. Well, since you don't need me to look after this, Darren said with a smirk, what can I do? What can I help you with? That knife? Tibbs pointed to the ornate one on the display. Darren smiled. Finally upgrading your equipment. He took it out of its case. Come, the sheath is in the back, and you'll need it. This is something to be treated with care. I'll show you how the whetstone needs to be handled. Tibbs followed the merchant into the back room, then the smaller storeroom. The door and walls were thicker, with the material used muffling sound that passed through it, making it harder for anyone outside to make out what was discussed. The material didn't use essence, simply its thickness and what it was made of. Darren unceremoniously dropped the knife on the table. How can I help? Have the guards been harassing you? It's not their job to harass an honest merchant like me. They've sat on a crate. How about the less honest merchant? Then harassing is too strong a word. One has visited each of us, and are on the road to explain how being forced to pay to be protected is against the guild's rules, and that we should report such crimes to the guards immediately. And did they? I don't believe you'd be walking about if they had. I was sent to a cell, Tibbs pointed out. That wasn't due to one of us. The warning came after you were arrested. I expect that was the new head of the guards making a point. Tibbs nodded. Do any of them want to end our agreement? Our arrangement? If they don't, are you in a position to maintain it? You lost a lot of runners fighting Sebastian. I've kept the patrols going, and we have stopped some who attacked the row and the area. So long as they don't attack en masse, we can deal with it. Once the new runners are here, I'll increase the numbers as much as needed to keep Merchant Row safe, if that's what they want. Darren smiled. You're letting us decide. Of course. You'd make a poor merchant. Tibbs rolled his eyes. That's because I'm a rogue. It's because you are a decent person. To be a good merchant, you need to be willing to seize any opportunity to increase the coins you have, and that means taking advantage of those in less fortunate situations. Darren produced a sheathed knife from within the many folds he wore and offered it to Tibbs. That will be 3 silver. Tibbs eyed the knife. For those, I'll take that one. He motioned to the knife on the table. This isn't worth 3 copper. Tibbs, you wound me. I only display the best I have, easily worth 3 times what one is. I couldn't. Then it's sharpened. It's sharpened, Tibbs asked, feigning surprise. That's all that's needed to make that one better than the rest, isn't it? Now you're just being disrespectful, Darren scolded. Have any of the knives I sold you let you down? None of them hit what I throw them at. I'm afraid that is more to do with you than them. I will sell you this for 1 silver and 6 copper. That's more than fair. I could call the guards and hand you over for thievery. Anything more than 10 copper qualifies as that. You've barely looked at it, admired the work which went into the hilt, the filigree on the guard. That alone is worth the measly 3 copper above a silver I'm asking for. With a sigh, Tibbs unhooked his pouch from his belt, and Darren smiled as he looked through it. Tibbs took a silver coin out. I don't have any copper. I'll give you a silver for it. The smile failed. You, my boy, are a thief, the merchant pronounced. A rogue, Tibbs corrected. They exchanged coin for knife, and Tibbs pulled it out of the sheath. The edge need to be ground and sharpened. What do you expect for a silver? Darren asked with a huff. Something like this. He sheathed it and looped it to his belt. The agreement? None of my associates have said anything either way. I expect they might not be aware you're still offering it, with Sebastian no longer being a threat. Payment will be due in 10 days. Darren nodded. I'll discuss the situation with them. You will get pushback now that there is an alternative. Tibs shrugged as he stood. If they trust the guard, they're welcome to let them do their job. The guards don't charge anything for the protection they offer. Like you often say, Tibs tapped the cheap knife he bought, you get what you pay for. And Darren smiled. Tibs stood away from the transportation platform, watching the group appear. The first of the arrivals had sent ripples through Craggle Rock, and now runners and what seemed like every townsfolk were gathered as another group was led down the steps and started on dungeon way. You ever seen anyone looking so pitiful? Someone asked, and no one laughed. Scared was what they'd looked like, and young. Tibs wouldn't be the youngest runner to enter the dungeon, since a few of the arrivals were carried in the oldest arms. Maybe the cells they were taken from are in the habit of beating them daily. Someone replied in a serious tone, if disbelieving tone. Those aren't guards, quickly stated. They're soldiers. It had to be 3 and 0 of them being escorted, boys and girls, and half that being carried. Bardick's story of babes being thrown in a dungeon to feed it came back to him, and Tibs reinforced the ice coursing through him. That came back. Okay. Tibs recalled Bardick's story of babes being thrown in dungeon to feed it. And he reinforced the ice coursing through him. That was the reason the rogue had given Tibs for trying to kill Stowe, so the guild wouldn't do that here. Could he talk Stowe into making the first floor easier for them? Wouldn't it be better for the dungeon if they grew up to be stronger before they failed? Tibs didn't care about the title of being the youngest runner to survive the dungeon. He'd rather one of them held it, that they all did. Tibs didn't think any of them were straight, even those in nothing more than rags and dirt. They had the beaten sense to them the streets instill in all who lived there, but he saw nothing of the spark of defiance needed to survive it. Even the oldest of the boys and girls he watched walk by had lost all will to fight, had it beaten out of them by the way some limped and how an arm was bent improperly. What kind of cell did that to someone? And held the babes? How could babies deserve to be in a cell? Bardick had told them stories of nobles using lower-class women, and what they did if one who had a child as a result came asking for help. That was all it took for the mother to deserve a stay in a cell with her babe still in her arms. Only, where were the mothers? All Tibs saw were children, not one of them older than Jackal had been when Tibs had first met him. Those aren't criminal, Quigley said, his tone so sad Tibs had looked at him, had to look at him. They're war urchins. And that concludes Chapter 12 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to if you want to read the story, it is up for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me as well as read ahead of Royal Road, my Patreon is up about 20 chapters. That is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.